Death Mage Chapter 114, The Trojan Horse Plan and the One Whose Left Hand I Have. A strange scene was unfolding in a vast underground church with rows of thick pillars.
Kill me, wasn't that your goal?
She had been forced to wear only a thin piece of cloth that would have reminded Vandalu of a surgical gown.
For someone who was called the Liberating Princess Knight, leader of the Sauron Liberation Front, this is quite the cheap show of courage.
He was an old man who was as thin as a dried tree, with his bulging crimson eyes as his only large feature.
I do not fear death. Even if I die, my companions will definitely achieve the Sauron Duchy's freedom.
She was someone who would have received a knighthood long ago if the Sauron Duchy hadn't become occupied by the Amid Empire. Given the social status of the Bearheart family, she was supposed to become the kind of knight who commanded soldiers and defended towns and villages from bandits and monsters, rather than the kind of knight who took part in tournaments to entertain lords and escorted high-class ladies. Iris had been trained and educated by her now-deceased father since she was a child, so that she could one day fulfill this role. And though she had acted as a leader of resistance activities, she had constantly been fighting on the front lines. She had crossed blades with bandits and the soldiers of the Empire's army countless times, and her body bore scars from numerous wounds inflicted by blades and arrows. She had faced dangers that could have claimed her life and had passed through many battlefields. She had even walked close to the line between life and death in many of them. Her courage towered above that of others, so much so that it was impossible to imagine that she was just a girl, less than 20 years of age.
Considering that, the muscles of her arms and legs seem quite tense, don't they? This is the same response that I would expect from a child trembling in fear, you know.
His words struck true, and Iris let out a groan. She was aware that she was afraid of Gubaman and the things that he would do to desecrate her. Of course, she wasn't scared of being wounded or killed. She was frustrated at the fact that she had been defeated before achieving her goals, but she had become the liberating Princess Knight with the determination to face this. She wouldn't start feeling fear now. If the Empire had captured her, they would have tortured her. Depending on her captors, her chastity might have been taken from her. She had been prepared for all of this, but what Gubaman was going to do to Iris was on a completely different level. She knew this from the heartburn-inducing stench of blood, from seeing the fates of the ones who had produced this stench. She knew it even though she didn't want to know. There were several dozen zombie giants that were even larger than the largest titans, watching over the area while letting out deep groans. And there were vampire zombies who looked just like bats, hanging from the pillars and ceiling of the underground church with their fangs bared. Some of them were the vampires who had brought Iris here. After Iris's abduction, Gubaman had brought them here with space attribute magic, thanked them for their efforts, and then promptly slaughtered them all.
Well done. As a reward, I shall add you to the bottom of my collection.
Iris had been unable to believe her eyes at the scene that unfolded afterwards. Not only the subordinate vampires, but even the noble-born vampires that she and her companions had been unable to land a single blow against, had been unable to do anything to defend themselves as they were slaughtered one-sidedly. And with hands that were used to handling corpses, very used to handling corpses, Gubaman had turned them into undead. He had combined the corpses of the weak subordinate vampires, which had fallen to pieces, to form a zombie giant with 10 vampires incorporated in it, and turned the noble-born vampire corpses into vampire zombies. Iris could see a countless number of vampire zombies just by glancing around. She felt a chill as she imagined just how many times this madman had carried out this process. But the most repulsive were the undead that the madman had lined up proudly, the ones he referred to as his collection. 3 groans rose from one of the undead in that collection. Iris had been reunited with the person she had wished to meet one more time in the worst possible form. Her father, Lord Bearheart, who had died in battle during the war against the Amid Empire. His corpse had never been recovered. Iris had seen him as a part of an enormous zombie with 3 heads, 3 pairs of arms, and 3 pairs of legs.
How dare you trample the dignity of the dead, the pride of my father who risked his life to defend his nation? You scum! You intend to kill me and toy with my corpse, just as you did with my father's, don't you? How about you just get on with it?
But against her expectations, Gubeman's expression changed for the first time, in response to these words that she had shouted at him.
I have already reflected upon what I did to your father. That was a mistake.
He stopped caressing Iris's body and clutched his head as if in anguish. Gubeman hadn't shown the slightest sign of guilt after killing his subordinates that he had shared his own blood with, nor after turning them into undead. But there was a deep sense of regret in his eyes now. Iris was rendered speechless in surprise, and before she could say anything, Gubeman continued.
During that war between the Amid Empire and Orbom Kingdom, there were two other corpses of well-known knights alongside your father's. A playful mood took over me, and I created a zombie by combining the three corpses. The resulting zombie was powerful, but its movements were sluggish. Lord Berhart had made his name known for his splendid, agile swordsmanship, and I went and put him to waste.
Wah! Iris's surprised expression turned gradually into one of rage, but Gubeman took no notice of her.
It cannot be helped that his personality and intelligence was largely damaged. The true pleasure lies in resurrecting famous heroes in wooden doll-like states. But there is no meaning to it if the hero's special characteristics are not preserved. When creating composite zombies such as that one, the correct practice is to gather materials of the same type or decide on a principal material and then add other materials that supplement it.
What Gubeman was lamenting was not the act of turning Berhart into an undead itself, but the dissatisfactory result. It seemed that Gubeman had created his undead with a different sense of art to Turnisha's. He was fixated on the practical use of the undead, not just the materials used to create them.
You bastard, how much do you have to toy with my father before you're satisfied?
HMPH, that is why I am apologizing for not making good use of his materials. I have no idea what young people are thinking these days.
Most old people in the world had this thought occur to them at least once, but Gubeman was looking at things from a completely impossible angle.
Well, it does not matter. It will be amusing to see you become a corpse doll with hollow eyes, yelping as you obey my commands. But I must wait to see the results of the others before I decide what kind of undead I shall turn you into.
Iris gasped.
You are planning to abduct someone other than me? Could it be?
Ho, quite perceptive, aren't you? I am talking about the commander and vice-captain of the other resistance organization, the reborn Sauron Duchy Army.
Raymond Dono and Rick Dono.
Iris's head, which had been hot with anger, suddenly became cold. There should be someone who could take her place as the liberating Princess Knight. Her companions should do fine without her. However, there was no replacement for Raymond, the illegitimate child of Duke Sauron. His face was quite well known throughout the duchy, and although he had abandoned his right to succeed the family, his bloodline had a large influence now that the continuation of the Sauron family's lineage was in jeopardy. And unlike Iris, who had kept her true identity hidden from others apart from her companions as much as she could, Raymond had used his appearance, charisma, ability to speak, and his own birth as weapons to gather the reborn Sauron Duchy army under his command. He probably had a plan for his own rise to power after the Sauron Duchy was retaken, but that was precisely why Raymond's organization had become the largest resistance organization. But if Raymond and his younger brother Rick, who had been supporting him all this time, were to disappear simultaneously, the reborn Sauron Duchy army would break up at best, turn into a disorderly gathering of people, and collapse at worst. If that happened, all rebellion activities would be set back tremendously.
You bastard, how far will you go to ruin our Sauron Duchy?
I do not know whether you can call it yours, but I do not care what happens to the Sauron Duchy. After all, the world of you creatures who do not even live more than a few hundred years is like a fleeting dream. Your nations are created and destroyed numerous times during the time it takes me to admire my collection. They are but sandcastles at the shore, are they not?
For Gubeman, who had lived for 100,000 years since the age of the gods, the nations of people who lived for less than 1,000 years were, just as he said, like dreams or sandcastles.
Seekers, you.
Now then, it is time. I am looking forward to seeing whether you become an undead on your own or part of a resistance trio undead.
The vampires who had captured Rick were taking care of his basic needs while keeping him bound, blindfolded and gagged.
He probably won't die within a day or two, but it would be problematic if he gets weaker by the time we take him to Gubeman Sama.
Rick was treated quite roughly, but thanks to the treatment that he was receiving, he wasn't suffering from dehydration. The food he was given was a liquid made by boiling cut-up pieces of dried meat and vegetables, and it tasted worse than anything he had ever eaten, however. And after a short while, Rick noticed that the vampires were arguing fiercely over something.
How did it come to this? Why at a time like this?
Miles, what do we do? What are we supposed to do now? I've only lived for 200 years. I don't want to die.
It's obvious what we're going to do, isn't it? That plan, we're going to pull off that plan. We don't have any other choice.
What? I don't want to do that. How can we discard our pride as vampires?
Then do you want to die? You want to die, don't you? Whether you want to be killed by Gubaman-sama, killed by the Dampier, or killed by me, decide right now, you selfish boy.
The chaos that looked as if it would develop into full-blown discord between the vampires reached Rick's ears. They were being so conspicuous about it that Rick wondered whether it was some kind of trap. But after this conversation, it seemed that all of the vampires had gone somewhere, except for a few left behind to watch him.
It seems that you've done well, as expected of you, Aniyu, now as long as you get away from these vampires' plan.
Rick held these expectations of his brother, but half a day later, those expectations were betrayed.
It's almost time. Bring that little brother Kun over here.
With only his blindfold removed, Rick was taken somewhere else, where he saw the vampires and his older brother, who was bound like he was.
No, Aniyu, it's not a fake, it's real.
Rick had hoped that it was an imposter, but there was no way that he would mistake someone else for the older brother he respected and loved. Though the monster leather armor that he normally wore hadn't been taken off, he had been disarmed and tied up with rope, and he was casting his eyes downward. And this man was Raymond without a doubt. He didn't have any visible wounds, and his face didn't look pale, but he was limp and lifeless. Perhaps he was fatigued, or perhaps he had only recently recovered from injuries with healing magic or potions.
I have to somehow at least let Aniyu escape.
Rick hardened his resolve to make this happen, but that resolve wavered as he heard a harsh sound, as if something hard was creaking loudly, and he suddenly noticed an old man in front of him.
Oh, to think that you have captured 2 of them, and they are still alive.
Gubaman's eyes were so wide open in delight that it looked as if his eyeballs would fall out of their sockets. Rick was an exceptional individual, but he wasn't a superhuman like an A-class or an S-class adventurer. He could only fall to his knees at the sight of this sinister being.
Well done, Miles. I am proud to have you as my subordinate. Ha ha ha, it is an honor to receive your praise. But there is a faint smell of blood coming from Raymond. It seems that his vitality has been depleted a little too. That is, I am terribly sorry. When we captured him, he put up more of a resistance than we expected, but we have healed all of his wounds.
Miles's face remained stiff as he spoke.
Well, it does not matter. He does not seem to have any visible injuries, and I did not expect you to capture him without harming him.
If he were to punish Miles and those under him for their ineptitude, it was possible that some of them might escape. He would have to bring them to the underground church before using them as materials.
Now then, we will be teleporting. Stay still.
Gubaman recited an incantation, and with another harsh, creaking sound, they were in the underground church that contained countless undead and the restrained Iris. Still bound, Iris turned around and hanged her head in resignation.
Rick Dono, and Raymond Dono as well.
Her as well.
Rick muttered as he shook his head, seeing that Iris had been captured first. And Raymond didn't show any reaction to speak of. His head continued to hang low.
Now then, I suppose I will connect the materials with chains. I must figure out what kind of undead you will become before I kill you. Kihihi, I cannot leave this to anyone else. This moment, the moment of the first taste of the sense of accomplishment from having a hero offered to my hands.
Feeling an impact, Gubaman looked at his own stomach. To his disbelief, there was a black, horn-like object piercing into it, penetrating all the way to his back. But the most unbelievable thing was that this horn was protruding from Raymond's own stomach.
Impossible.
Gubaman screamed, coughing blood from his mouth. Obeying the warnings of his survival instincts that he had not heard in a long time, he tried to step backwards. But he could not remove the horn that was skewering his stomach. He could not move from where he was. And then several more black horns appeared from the inside of Raymond's body and closed in on Gubaman.
Iron Slash.
Gubaman severed the horn with an unarmed fighting technique martial skill and somehow managed to retreat and run away, suffering cuts all over his body in the process.
Raymond Tona.
Iris and Rick, who was still gagged, opened their eyes wide in astonishment and stared at Raymond's grotesque body, which was covered in blood from the horns that had been produced from his body. He raised his face upwards ominously. It looked like the face of a hollow puppet.
You bastard, why do you have the Demon King's horns?
Gubeman shouted at the grotesque Raymond, blood and saliva flying from his mouth. As if in response, Raymond convulsed gruesomely, and then his stomach split open.
It was cramped in there.
Several screams resounded in the underground church as the white dampier, Vandeleu, crawled out of Raymond's stomach. After taking Raymond hostage, Vandeleu had been trying to draw out Rick, the criminal responsible for tricking Orbia and murdering her. After finding out that Rick had been taken captive by vampires, Vandeleu discussed the upcoming change of plans with everyone. If possible, Vandeleu wanted to have Orbia settle things personally, and he wanted to gain information from the vampires. As Vandeleu and his companions racked their brains to figure out what should be done to achieve these goals, the vampires gathered at the location that Vandeleu had designated, the open space that he had created in front of the camp. While waving a white flag.
We surrender, please listen to what we have to say.
Vandeleu's mind stopped working for a few seconds at the sight of the vampire with a wild-looking beauty to his appearance at the front, calling out within one style tone of speech while waving the white flag in front of the other vampires.
That person is a man, isn't he?
He definitely looks like a man to me. Is he not a man?
The minds of many vampires who have lived for a long time undergo changes. How very embarrassing.
Belmond, who was aware that she herself was a strange person, explained this phenomenon to the bewildered Darsha and Privel.
Birkin, what will we do?
For now, I suppose we'll hear what they have to say. There's no sign of enemies waiting to ambush us, and even if they're planning something, we can slaughter them all whenever we want.
The rank 10 Belmond and rank 9 Notchen were present, and Vandeleu himself was here too. A dozen or so vampires was no match for them.
I don't mind killing them without listening to them and then extracting information from their spirits afterwards, but since Rick isn't here, it's probably best to deal with them peacefully for now.
Vandeleu thought as he stepped outside Notchen's walls with Belmond to hear what the vampires had to say. And then the vampires Miles and his followers all began begging for their lives and explaining the situation.
Please spare us at this rate, we're going to be killed by that crazy bastard Gubeman. We weren't involved in the incident where your father was killed, we're telling the truth.
We offer you Rick Paris, whom we've captured alive. We'll tell you information about Gubeman and whatever else you want to know, so please just spare our lives.
We'll offer you anything else we can. We'll become your subordinates or servants or anything. We just don't want to die.
The plan that Miles had mentioned was, to put it plainly, for the vampires to offer everything and plead for their lives. It was a horrible plan that involved trampling over their own pride as noblemen of the night. It was no wonder that some of the other vampires had objected to it. However, the reality was that they were in a position that they wouldn't survive if they did not do this. Since Vandeleu had already captured Raymond, Miles and his followers would need miracle after miracle to occur if they wanted to abduct Raymond. They would be killed first. In fact, since they had already abducted Rick, whom Vandeleu and his companions were targeting, it had been highly likely that the vampires would be attacked and killed if they didn't run away. But if they gave up on acquiring Raymond, Gubeman would see them as having failed their mission and kill them. They couldn't rely on getting an ounce of support from the other vampires who served Gubeman, and asking for help from Birkin's group would have been downright stupid. They were vampires who worshipped the same evil god, but since they belonged to different factions, they were competitors. They couldn't expect kind treatment from each other. But with that said, abandoning everything and fleeing was dangerous, too. They would probably be able to hide for a while, but the connections in the underworld that they had been using up until now would become unusable, so it would be difficult to survive for a long period of time. Even if they were lucky and could find a place where they could settle down, if Birkin or Gubeman's subordinates found out where they were one day, they would be murdered for being traitors. So then, perhaps fleeing the Bon Gaia continent altogether and moving to a different continent was a better choice, but this would be a reckless decision as well. Other continents had vampires worshipping other evil gods marking their territory. Miles and his companions would be outsiders. Hoping that there would be a place for them to survive, there was a gamble with unfavorable odds. That was why the option with the most hope for Miles and his followers, the option that they would never choose under normal circumstances, was to surrender to Vandelue and beg for their lives.
I understand the situation. Depending on your cooperation with us and how you work for us, we might take you in.
This choice had actually been quite effective for Vandelue. The things that Miles and his followers were offering, namely Rick and information on Gubeman, were things that Vandelue could obtain even after killing them. However, the plan that had just occurred to Vandelue had a high chance of failure if Miles and his followers didn't cooperate. But on the other hand, if they cooperated, it had a high chance of success. And Vandelue believed that he shouldn't kill people if there was no reason to. To him, Miles and his followers, who had begged for their lives with everything they had, were not people that he should kill. It seemed that they hadn't been involved in the execution of his father Valen either. Vandelue had already heard the story from the vampire responsible for that before breaking his soul, and there certainly hadn't been a vampire within one like tone of speech mentioned. Sparing their lives in exchange for their cooperation was probably the right thing to do.
Really, leave it to us, we'll cooperate with you on anything you need.
Now then, I'm going to give you an outline of my draft plan for killing Rick Paris and Gubeman, and taking back Talisheim's heroes who were stolen by Gubeman, Zandia, and Gina.
The vampires, including Belmond, choked in disbelief. Miles and his followers knew that Vandelue had already defeated Turnisha, someone who was Gubeman's equal. Belmond had been present at the time, but even they were surprised by Vandelue's declaration. Killing Turnisha was the result of an elaborate plan that took a long time, involving the use of the class adventure party, the five-colored blades. Now, he was going to improvise some additions to his plan, which had initially been just to get revenge on Rick, in order to slay a pure-breed vampire who had lived since the Age of the Gods. Given this announcement, Belmond and the other vampires couldn't be blamed for choking in disbelief. Some of Miles's subordinates seemed worried about the fact that Belmond had reacted the same way. But Belmond returned to her usual courteous self.
If you say that you desire it, Dana-sama, then it is my duty to obey. I do not have any objections, but please think about what kind of plan this will be.
Seeing this, Miles and his followers seemed to have decided to suppress their trembling.
Now that it comes to this, I'll follow you all the way. There's no problem with this, is there, guys?
He added, looking at the other vampires. And so, the plan to kill Gubeman began.
But with that said, the one who must suffer the most trouble is me, is it not, Master?
As he said, he was the one who had to work the hardest.
It's fine, isn't it? After I kill Gubeman, I'll bring back a lot of undead that he created.
Then I suppose it cannot be helped. I would have liked to follow you like I did last time, Master, but it seems that you have many people to protect this time. I shall pass on this one.
All Vandelue had to do after that was quickly help Luciliano with the surgical procedure with his surgery skill, and then arrange to meet up with Miles and the other vampires. And those events had led to the current situation. Covered in blood, Vandelue exhaled as he crawled out of Raymond, the special live dead that Luciliano had made surgical adjustments to. Despite being smaller than other boys his age, it had been difficult for Vandelue to hide inside Raymond, whose build wasn't particularly large. Luciliano had secured the required amount of space. He had increased the room to work with as much as possible by making it look as if Raymond was wearing leather armor, reduced his heart and lungs to compact sizes, removed all of his digestive organs, and rearranged his blood vessels. Vandelue had forced himself into this space by dislocating his joints and turning some parts of his body into spirit form, and stayed hidden inside. All of this had been so that he could avoid using magic as much as possible, allowing him to go unnoticed until he was right next to Gubeman. The result of this effort was that Gubeman was standing in front of Vandelue now, blood spurting from his mouth and veins popping out over his head in anger.
See, curse you, how dare you, ruin my materials.
Gubeman was on his knees, still struggling to remove the Demon King's horns that were protruding from his body. He was a pure-breed vampire like Turnisha, who who had regenerated her internal organs and spine despite being reduced to a mere severed head. Normally, having a large hole opened in his stomach wouldn't be a fatal wound. It would heal within a few minutes at most. However, each of the piercing wounds caused by the Demon King's horns had gouged out a large amount of Gubeman's vitality.
I can't pull it out.
The Demon King's horns couldn't be removed, even with the superhuman strength that didn't match his thin arms that resembled withered branches. The surface of each of the Demon King's horns had numerous Demon King's suckers growing on it. The suckers had attached themselves to Gubeman's flesh, organs, and bones, firmly fixing themselves inside his body. Even a nearly invincible pure-breed vampire wouldn't be able to easily tear out his own organs and spine. But it seemed that the undead-obsessed old man was far more displeased with the fact that the materials that he had almost obtained had been ruined than the damage he had suffered.
You bastard, how dare you turn my corpse, my hero, into such damaged goods?
MMMPH.
Rick, who was still gagged, was screaming something. Tears were flowing from his bloodshot eyes, and though his screams were muffled, they sounded pleasant. It seemed that he was incredibly shocked by the sight of his older brother, who had collapsed onto the ground now that the inside of his body was hollow, just as Vandalyu had planned. But disposing of Rick would come later.
Miles?
Why yes, we're falling back, guys.
He and the other vampires had been dumbfounded at the sight of Gubeman, someone who had always been an absolutely powerful figure to them, vomiting blood and suffering. They snapped into action in response to Vandalyu's words.
Take that woman with you.
Vandalyu added, pointing at Iris.
Certainly.
The vampires picked up Rick, who was thrashing around, and cut the chains binding Iris with their axes and claws to carry her off as well.
You bastards, you betrayed me. Prepare yourselves. I will kill every last one of you and turn you into undead.
Gubeman screamed upon realizing that his subordinates had betrayed him.
Shut up, you crazy old man. Looking at all the vampire zombies around, I can tell that we would have met the same fate whether we betrayed you or not. We couldn't keep up with your silly nonsense anymore.
His words were completely reasonable, but it seemed that all logical thought had already fallen out of Gubeman's mind.
Curse you, splitting hairs over such a trivial matter.
Gubeman cursed Miles over something completely unreasonable, before turning to give orders to the subordinates that would never betray him.
Undead, slaughter them all.
Gubeman had lost half of his sanity, but he didn't expect rank 5 and 6 undead to be able to do anything against Vandalyu, who used the fragments of the Demon King. As long as they could slow him down a little, that would be fine. His subordinates were simply products to be recycled, so he would feel no loss even if they were destroyed. The zombie giants and vampire zombies groaned as they began moving. Vandalyu stayed where he was. Gubeman's improvised, handmade undead approached Vandalyu, but then they turned around. And then they bared their fangs at Gubeman and roared at him threateningly.
Why are my undead? Even if I did improvise their design, why are the undead that I created myself?
I can tame undead.
What did you say?
This fact was common knowledge for those who knew Vandalyu, but for Gubeman, this was an astounding situation. He had killed most of his subordinates in fear that they would betray him, but he had been betrayed by the undead, who should have been completely obedient to him. It was as if he had simply supplied Vandalyu with more forces of his own will.
But it doesn't seem like I can tame all of them. This is a rare situation, so I'm a little surprised.
There were some undead who hadn't left Gubeman's side. Undead that emanated a presence that indicated that they weren't ordinary undead, equipped with magic items.
Yes, that's right, my beloved ones are here. Now then, lend me your strength.
Lord Bearheart, a handsome young man wielding a spear, a female Titan priest, and a female Titan mage girl, and there were several other undead heroes with them. Their power was much less than when they were alive, but the average noble-born vampire would be no match for them. Even Miles was watching with a pale face, holding his breath. But rather than feeling threatened, Vandalyu felt happy at the fact that he had found the ones that he truly needed to protect.
Zandia and